In 1963, Mossad chief Meir Amit had breakfast with the Israeli Air Force. During their conversation, the commander made a blunt request. He needed a Soviet MiG-21. The MiG-21 was the most advanced fighter jet in the Soviet arsenal, capable of speeds over 2,200 kilometers per hour. It was light, lethal, and mass-produced for Israel's hostile neighbors in Egypt, Syria, and Iraq. For Western intelligence, the aircraft was a total enigma. The CIA had already spent years trying to get close to the jet and failed. Mossad itself had launched 2 previous operations that ended in disaster. Without understanding this jet's radar systems or maneuverability, Israel faced an unquantifiable threat in future conflicts. They needed the aircraft to study its weaknesses, or they risked losing control of their skies. Soviet security protocols made a defection nearly impossible. Advisors strictly controlled the maintenance of the jets and forbade ground crews from ever filling fuel tanks to capacity. As this map shows, the MiG-21 simply didn't have the range to reach Israel from an Iraqi base on a standard fuel load. Mossad's first attempt to break this system in Egypt resulted in a trap. Their agents were betrayed, arrested, and publicly executed in a Cairo square. A second attempt in Iraq was equally disastrous. 2 pilots were recruited, but when they attempted to back out of the mission, Mossad agents had to assassinate them to prevent their entire network from being exposed to the Iraqi authorities. The Soviet Union's physical and procedural constraints were working. Throwing money and traditional espionage at the problem had only resulted in a trail of bodies. Mossad realized they couldn't hack the machine. They had to find a person within the Iraqi Air Force whose grievances made them a viable target for defection. They identified Munir Redfa, a top-tier pilot with a deep-seated resentment toward his government. Despite his skill, Redfa was a Christian in a Muslim-majority military. His commanders had explicitly told him he would never be promoted to squadron leader because of his faith. Redfa was also being ordered to bomb Kurdish villages, targeting a minority population that he personally sympathized with. The moral toll of these missions was pushing him toward a breaking point. In Greece, an undercover Israeli officer finally approached him. The offer was a clean slate, $1 million, and the safe extraction of his entire family to Israel. By systematically discriminating against one of their best pilots, the Iraqi state had created its own security vulnerability. Redfa agreed to the deal. The extraction was a massive logistical undertaking. Over several months, Mossad agents smuggled Redfa's wife, children, and extended family out of Iraq in small groups, using fake medical emergencies and vacation papers as cover. To solve the fuel problem, Redfa manipulated the ground crew. He mocked their reliance on Soviet advisors, asking if they were too afraid to trust their own pilots with a full tank. His taunts worked. The crew eventually started filling his MiG-21 to capacity without reporting it to their superiors. On August 16, 1966, Redfa took off for a training mission. Once clear of the base, he cut his radio and followed a pre-planned zigzag route across the desert, flying low to avoid Iraqi radar. When he entered Jordanian airspace, Mossad used a decoy. They relayed false information to the Jordanian controllers, claiming the blip on their radar was merely a Syrian jet that had wandered off course. Jordan allowed him to pass. Just over an hour after takeoff, Redfa reached the Israeli border. A pair of Mirage fighters moved into formation beside him, escorting the first MiG-21 ever captured by the West down onto an Israeli airbase. By focusing on human psychology rather than hardware, Mossad succeeded where years of previous U.S. and Israeli efforts had failed. The mission's success came at a steep personal cost for Redfa. His family in Israel viewed him as a traitor, and he lived out his remaining years in isolation, eventually dying of a heart attack in 1988. For Israel, the MiG-21 was a massive geopolitical leverage point. They allowed the United States to study the jet, but only in exchange for a critical trade. In return for access to the MiG, the U.S. handed over the technical files for the Soviet SAM-2 missile system. This gave Israel the data they needed to understand both the Soviet Union's primary fighter and its primary air defense. Stealing one aircraft had allowed Israel to map the secrets of 2 different pillars of Soviet military technology. 10 months later, during the Six-Day War, that knowledge was put to the test. Israeli pilots knew exactly how to exploit the MiG-21's blind spots and radar limitations. On the first day of combat, Israel dismantled the Arab air forces. They shot down 6 Syrian MiGs in aerial combat without losing a single fighter jet of their own. The Soviet Union had built an impenetrable machine and enforced perfect security protocols, but the entire system collapsed because they had alienated the human being entrusted to operate it.